Three young men, recklessly, sailed into the night without permission or blessing. No one knew that night would mark the beginning of their months-long disappearance in the Kalimantan Sea. Even more shockingly, one of them claimed to have seen a creature that couldn't possibly be human. Assalamu alaikum, dear friends, blessed by Allah. Before I share the story above, I recommend we recite salawat upon Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, so that this salawat may bear witness for us to receive intercession in the hereafter. Liking and subscribing to this channel greatly helps spread the message of Islam and becomes a continuous charity for us all. Imagine 3 full months adrift at sea, never touching land, only seeing the constantly changing waves and sky. Not because they were lost or shipwrecked, but because that was the destiny of the squid boat crew. Their lives weren't like ordinary fishermen who returned home every week. They lived on the sea, breathing under the pressure of work that knew no day or night, and enduring the sometimes unforgiving nature. That night, the Kalimantan sky enveloped a small harbor behind the mangrove forest. This harbor wasn't owned by a large company, but it was a gathering place for squid boats long known for their eerie and mysterious tales. There, a group of men with hardened faces and sun-darkened skin prepared to embark on a journey that not everyone could undertake. One of them was Jaya, a young man from Lombok who was a squid boat crew member for the first time. Jaya stood on the deck with a small bag on his back, looking at the dark blue wooden boat that seemed fragile but had a strong scent of the sea. He didn't say much, only stared at the old fishermen who looked more like warriors than sailors. They loaded special fishing gear, powerful lamps to attract squid from the depths of the night, and basic provisions. There was no comfort there. There was only equipment, diesel fuel, and an inexplicable spirit. Their captain, Pak Roji, a man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a scar on his cheek, gave a signal. That's when the ship's engine roared, slowly but surely beginning to move away from the harbor. Jaya didn't know that the sound of that engine would be his lullaby and his silent companion for months to come. The further they got from land, the quieter it became. No phone signal, no news from the outside world. Only the vast ocean and a sky full of stars. The first few days were filled with a mix of awe and fear. Every night, they would turn on bright lights into the sea, attracting squid from the bottom, hooking them one by one, and then storing them in ice chests. Sometimes they could get hundreds of kilograms in one night, sometimes almost nothing. But what made life on the boat different was time. At sea, time didn't seem to pass as it did on land. There were no fixed breaks, because squid didn't wait. If squid came, everyone had to be ready. If not, everyone slept as best they could. They ate only rice, salted fish, and coffee brewed with boiled seawater. Jaya began to lose track of the days. His eyes were weary, his hands rough, and his mind blank. His only entertainment was the stories from Pak Roji and the other crew members. But on the 10th night, a story made Jaya unable to sleep. Pak Roji sat on the deck, smoking his hand-rolled cigarette and speaking in a low voice. A long time ago, there was a young crew member like you. His face was like yours, innocent and full of spirit. He also came from Lombok for the first time. But on the 30th night, he jumped into the sea. He said he heard whispers every night from the bottom of the water. We thought he was crazy, but after that, this ship always got a lot of squid. Before that, it was almost bankrupt. Some say the sea demanded a sacrifice, and he was chosen. Jaya only laughed a little then, thinking the story was just to scare him. But in the following nights, something began to change. The ship's lights often went out suddenly. Squid came in large numbers, but at the same time, the air became colder than usual. Sometimes, a rattling sound like metal being knocked could be heard from below deck. And what made Jaya unable to sleep the most was that he started hearing a sound like a woman's whisper, calling his name. He tried to tell his friend, Tohir, but was only laughed at. But that night, as Jaya was about to go to the engine room, he saw a female figure standing at the end of the boat. Her hair was long, her gown seemed to float in the wind. Jaya froze. When he tried to call out, the figure disappeared just like that. The next morning, Jaya had a fever. His body shivered despite the scorching sun. Pak Roji told him to rest. But in his bed, the voice became clearer. A soft voice, like a song, but full of sadness. He opened his eyes, and saw above him, a pale woman's face staring at him. Jaya's scream made everyone panic. Some of the crew went up to the deck, seeing Jaya trembling and crying. Pak Roji only sighed, then said softly, "If it's like this, it means we'll get a big catch tonight. But one of us might not return." The atmosphere became tense. Jaya realized that this wasn't just about working to catch squid. This was about surviving in a sea that held something inexplicable by logic. The ship continued to sail. Night began to fall. And Jaya knew the ocean wasn't finished greeting him yet. That night, the ocean seemed to be in a rage. The wind howled, bringing towering waves. Moonlight only occasionally pierced through thick clouds, making the ship's deck, where the crew usually joked, now look like a stage of emptiness. There was no laughter, no music, only heartbeats and the thud of waves pounding against the hull. Rian sat transfixed in the corner of the mess deck, holding his dented work helmet that had hit metal. His eyes stared blankly at the swaying ship's wall. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from an inexplicable fear. He wasn't new to the sea, but tonight was different. The sea seemed to be trying to swallow them all. In the engine room, Yayan, the chief engineer, shouted through the radio. His hand gripped a cable that had started to melt. The main engine had died twice because seawater was seeping into the lower compartment. He tried to stay calm, even though cold sweat dripped from his temples. This ship was old, and the storm seemed to know which part to hit first. On the bridge, Captain Rudy incessantly darted his gaze between the radar and the front window. There were no other ship signals within a 50-mile radius. They were truly alone in the dark and fierce Kalimantan Sea. He had silently prayed, begging Allah for the waves to subside soon. But that prayer went unanswered that night. At 2 in the morning, a loud noise echoed from the stern of the ship. All the crew members flinched. The ship tilted a few degrees to the right. They panicked, running towards the main deck. It turned out the squid net crane had collapsed, breaking loose from its base and crashing into the fish hold. Nets, ice boxes, and some heavy equipment fell into the sea. Rian and 2 of his friends tried to save the fishing gear still hanging on the side of the ship. But the large rope they were holding suddenly slipped. Rian was thrown back, his body almost falling into the sea if Wahoo hadn't caught his arm at the last second. Their hearts pounded. They looked at each other. No words. Only ragged breaths and overwhelming fear. Amidst the chaos, a small explosion suddenly echoed from a generator room. The ship's lights went out. Everything was plunged into complete darkness. Only the emergency lights on the bridge glowed dimly. Captain Rudy's voice, hoarse and tense, came through the loudspeaker. "We're shutting down all engines. Wait for the storm to subside. Everyone return to your places. Don't panic." But those words couldn't calm them. A new crew member who had only joined 2 weeks ago began to cry. He clung to a metal shelf, muttering prayers. The others sat silently, trying to compose themselves. Time passed very slowly. In the darkness and the seemingly endless rocking of the waves, the crew looked at the sky. Each one was lost in their thoughts. Some hoped to return to land and hug their children and wives. Some regretted why they had chosen this job. In the corner of the upper deck, Harry, one of the senior crew members, sat with his head bowed. He looked at the small wallet in his hand. A photo of his daughter, who had just graduated from elementary school, was still inside. He gently wiped away his tears so no one would see. He knew the ocean never promised to bring them home. It was 3:20. Suddenly, in the distance, lightning struck, followed by a thunderous rumble that shook the entire ship. Immediately, everyone ducked, fearing the next lightning bolt would strike their soaked metal vessel. However, after that, the sky began to calm. The waves that had been like mountains slowly diminished. The strong wind turned into a weak breeze. There were no more violent shakes. The sea suddenly became silent, as if the storm was just a fleeting test from the power of the universe. The crew members slowly dared to stand up. They looked at each other, making sure everyone was still alive. Captain Rudy emerged from the bridge, his eyes red from lack of sleep and stress, but a faint smile on his face. "We're safe. But this is just the beginning," he said softly. Everyone returned to their places with weary steps. But no one slept that night. Their hearts were still roaring like the waves that had just subsided. They knew that in the middle of this ocean, a storm could come at any time. And not just natural storms. Sometimes, a storm could come from within the ship itself. Especially when they realized something strange. In the cold storage room where they kept the squid, one of the fish crates was open. It was empty, even though it had been full that afternoon. There was no trace of water, no sign of squid having fallen out. And strangely, the smell of fish mixed with the scent of blood seemed to fill the entire room. No one dared to speak yet. But that night, they all felt something was with them on this ship. Something not human. The night sky above the ship was like a dark, lightless cloth. Even the stars were reluctant to show themselves that night. The sea undulated gently, but the blowing wind carried an unusual aura. The air grew heavy, as if carrying a burden that pressed on the lungs of everyone who breathed it. On the stern deck, Ilham, who was sweeping up leftover bait, seemed lost in thought. His gaze was empty, directed towards the endless darkness of the ocean. But as he went to empty the bucket into the sea, his eyes caught something illogical. A female figure. Her long hair cascaded, covering part of her face. Her body stood rigid at the end of the ship, almost hovering at the edge of the deck. She was silent, as if defying the waves, unmoved by the wind. Ilham instantly recoiled, his chest feeling as if struck hard from within. The bucket in his hand fell, echoing on the wooden deck. He ran towards the front cabin, bursting into the command room where Tigger and Haru were setting the sails. His face was deathly pale. "I saw a woman at the back of the ship. She was standing at the edge," he whispered, stammering. Tigger turned quickly. Haru immediately stood up, grabbing a large flashlight. The three of them went back to the deck, but there was nothing there. Only the sound of the wind and the crashing waves. "You're sleep-deprived, Ham," Tigger said, patting his shoulder. But Ilham swore his eyes hadn't deceived him. Even when he returned to his sleeping quarters, he still heard soft whispers in his ear. A voice that invited, seduced, and threatened all at once. That night, all the crew members found it hard to sleep. Whether it was Ilham's chilling story, or because the sea breeze now sounded like a woman's wail. Haru, who slept near the window, even woke up when his window suddenly opened by itself and the wind blew away his notebook. In the midst of that terrifying night, the engine room lights suddenly went out completely. The ship was plunged into instant darkness. The engine alarm didn't sound, as if the ship's power was absorbed by an invisible force. Tigger checked the generator room but found no severed cables or short circuits. It was as if an unseen hand had turned everything off. Then a sound was heard, not from the engine, not from the sea, but from beneath the ship. A pounding sound, like something trying to break out of the ship's belly. Haru pressed his ear to the wooden floor and immediately jumped back. "Someone's knocking from below," he said, clutching his chest. Everyone gathered. Their faces were pale. Cold sweat streamed despite the freezing air. They tried to quietly recite prayers. But the sound grew louder. Then a scream was heard. Long, shrill, as if from deep within the sea. A woman's cry, accompanied by terrifying laughter. Ilham screamed. His hand pointed out the window. "There she is. It's that woman. She's hovering over the water." Tigger and Haru turned, but all they saw was a thick fog covering the ship's surroundings. But the fog was unusual. Within it, tall, large shadows appeared, like humans, but blacker and longer. They stood on the water, slowly encircling the ship. Suddenly, the engine came back to life. The lights immediately came on. But the most surprising thing, all the squid nets were already on deck without anyone lifting them. And they were all empty. Not a single squid was caught, even though they had just been fishing extensively. Not only that, the nets were wet not with seawater, but with a dark red liquid, thick like blood. No one dared to touch it. Haru immediately turned on the emergency loudspeaker. "All crew to the central room. We need to discuss this. This is not normal." They all gathered. Some were already shivering. Some were reading short prayers. But no one could explain what they were experiencing. No one could sleep that night. Every step echoed as if answered from below deck. Tigger, the oldest and most experienced, began to show changes. He often stared blankly. Sometimes he talked to himself. His eyes were empty. Until one night, he stood at the stern where Ilham had seen the woman, and said softly, "I know who she is. She's not from our world." Before he could explain further, Tigger suddenly fainted. The following nights were never the same. The ship seemed haunted, not just by sea creatures, but by something far older and far darker than mere legend. And all of this was just the beginning of the impending disaster. The sky turned gloomy, as if holding back a long-suppressed rage. The sea wind, usually a loyal companion to the ship's crew, now transformed into an endlessly roaring enemy. Waves rolled like giants awakened from their long slumber, crashing against the squid boat's hull with an irresistible force. That night, Heavy rain poured down, accompanied by striking lightning, splitting the darkness of the seemingly endless Kalimantan Sea. The entire crew was on high alert. The ship's engine roared loudly against the current, but nature seemed indifferent. House-high waves slapped the ship's deck, making anyone standing there too weak to endure. Pac Derman, the ship's captain who had sailed for decades, looked pale this time. He knew this storm wasn't just any storm. There was something odd. Something he had only heard about in old fishermen's tales. Something illogical, but now it felt so real. As the storm raged, a strange sound came from the stern of the ship. A faint, drawn-out calling sound, amidst the roar of the wind. Aldi, who was on night watch, turned in confusion. His eyes scanned the stern, but there was no one there. He refocused his attention on the sea. But the sound came again, this time closer. Aldi tried to ignore it. But the sound seemed to penetrate his mind, as if coming from within his own head. Don't look back. Don't look at me. Don't. But human curiosity is indeed stronger than fear. Aldi slowly turned, and his eyes hit something standing still at the very end of the stern. A female figure with long hair, wearing tattered cloth, stood with her back to him. The heavy rain didn't wet her hair, and even her clothes appeared dry. Aldi's body froze. His breath hitched. The sound of the wind and storm seemed to disappear. Only the pounding of his own heart deafened his ears. Suddenly, the figure turned. But her face was dark, unseen. Only one thing was clear. Her eyes glowed red like embers in the fog. Aldi dropped his flashlight and stumbled backward, falling to a seated position. His scream startled the other crew members. They came running, but when they reached the stern, there was no one. Only Aldi, trembling with fear, his face ashen, his mouth muttering unintelligible names. Pac Derman saw him and let out a long sigh. He pulled Aldi into the cabin and told the other crew members to return to their positions. Inside the cabin, Pac Derman lit a cigarette and began to speak in a heavy voice. You saw her, didn't you? If that's the case, don't ever talk about her. On this sea, it's not just humans who sail. The story added to the tension among the crew. Everyone became quieter. Every sound of the waves seemed like a whisper. Every shadow became terrifying. And every night, strange sounds became more frequent. Sometimes like crying, sometimes like a child's laughter. The ship was now not just defying waves and storms, but also something invisible. Something that might have long resided in the deep ocean. The storm finally subsided, but the tension was not over. The next day, one of the crew members was found unconscious in the engine room, his body soaking wet even though there was no water seepage in the engine room. In his hand, he clutched a strand of long black hair, whose origin was unknown. Pac Derman was seen increasingly alone, staring at the sea with a burdened expression, as if he knew that this journey was not over, and the ocean had not yet revealed all its secrets. When the next night arrived, the sea was calm again. But that calm was even more terrifying, like the silence before a more terrible storm. And sure enough, that night it wasn't just sounds that returned, but also shadows standing at the end of the ship. Not one, but three. They just stood, silent, looking in the same direction, into the ship, towards Aldi. And Aldi knew, something was looking for him. A figure, or perhaps more than one. And they were not satisfied. They were not finished. They did not want to leave. The sky began to darken. The whisper of the sea wind transformed into an eerie moan. The ship's cabin felt quieter than usual. The crew no longer bustled with card games or jokes. That night, they chose silence, some staring blankly at the sea, others pulling their blankets tight. Only the sound of waves and the creaking of the hull accompanied the night. Andy, who had grown accustomed to the ship's rhythm, felt uneasy that night. Something made his chest tighten. He decided to go up on deck, just to enjoy the wind and hopefully calm his mind. From a distance, he saw a dark shadow on the surface of the sea. Its shape was like a figure standing on the water. Andy rubbed his eyes, making sure he wasn't sleepy or hallucinating. But when he looked again, the shadow was gone. He hurried back inside. But as he opened the cabin door, a faint weeping sound came from the engine room. The sound was so faint, like a small child crying in pain. Yet all the crew members were in the upper cabin. Andy hesitated, but his curiosity was greater. He cautiously stepped towards the engine room, descending the cold, misty iron ladder. The closer he got to the source of the sound, Andy's breathing grew heavier. The weeping turned into a scream. loud and heartbreaking. He almost retreated, but just as he was about to turn, something pulled his shirt from behind. Reflexively, he turned around and there was no one there. Andy trembled. He ran with all his might back upstairs. But when he reached the cabin, he saw a sight that made his blood run cold. All the crew members stood facing the window, silent and staring straight out at the open sea. Not a single one spoke. Their eyes were wide open, as if seeing something terrifying. Andy approached one of them, Imam, and shook his shoulder. Imam didn't react. His eyes were glazed over, his mouth slightly open. Andy turned to look at the sea, trying to figure out what they were seeing. But all he saw was darkness. Suddenly Imam fell to his knees. His breath was ragged and he sobbed uncontrollably. The others began to collapse one by one. Some cried. Some screamed unintelligibly. The atmosphere became chaotic. The captain, who had just woken up, tried to calm them, but failed. That night became the most terrifying night of their entire voyage. The next morning, after everyone had calmed down, Imam finally spoke. With a hoarse voice and trembling body, he said that night they all saw a very tall creature walking on the sea. Its eyes were red. Its body seemed to be made of stone and squid skin. The creature stood for a long time staring at their ship, then disappeared into the waves. Most horrifying of all, before disappearing, the creature pointed at Andy. Andy was stunned. He felt his body go limp. Why did the creature point at him? What was its connection to the weeping sound in the engine room? And more importantly, would the creature return tonight? The night sky blanketed the ocean in dark, starless gloom. The squid boat's lights, usually dim at the stern, now flickered strangely, as if disturbed by something unseen. The wind, usually a gentle breeze across the deck, turned into a sharp hiss, like whispers from another world whose name shouldn't be spoken. Jamal, on engine duty, suddenly felt a chill down his spine. He looked left and right but saw no one. Usually, he was accompanied by Yamin, who liked to smoke clove cigarettes while leaning against the engine room wall. But that night, there was no sound of a cigarette being lit, no smell of burning tobacco. Only the engine pulsed like a restless heart. From the bridge, Pak Dul shouted. His tone was unusual, a mix of panic and shock. Ship. Only that single word escaped his lips. But it was enough to send all the crew members scrambling from their bunks. They ran to the bridge. And as they looked north, precisely amidst the descending fog, they saw the silhouette of a large ship, completely dark. There was no engine sound, no ripples around it. It was as if the ship was floating, or had emerged from a nightmare world. The ship was unlike a fishing vessel, nor was it a cargo ship. Its form was ancient, like a relic from a world war, with tattered mast poles and a rusted hull. But the most terrifying thing was that the ship showed no signs of life. No people. No lights. No sound. Some of the crew members began to whisper prayers. Some murmured incantations. Others clutched old sandalwood prayer beads. But everyone knew that fear had already crept into their chests. Pak Dul ordered the ship to move away. But when the helmsman tried to turn the wheel, there was no response. The engine, which had been alive moments ago, now seemed to slowly die. The lights began to dim one by one. The wind stopped. The sea became silent. Too silent, so much so that the sound of their own heartbeats was terrifying. Suddenly, from the direction of the strange ship, the sound of an old ship's bell echoed. An ancient metallic clang that reverberated long and far across the ocean. Once, twice, 3 times. After the third clang, a light appeared from the hull of the old ship. Not the light of a lamp, but fire. Blue flames slowly ignited along the deck, like giant candle flames. And amidst that light, figures began to appear. Not human. Their bodies were tall, slender, wearing ancient sailors' clothes with faces that had no eyes. Only empty sockets. They stood still, staring directly at the squid boat where the crew members shivered. Yamin, who stood at the very front, closed his eyes. His lips trembled, reciting verses. But after only 3 recitations, his body was suddenly pushed backward as if by a large hand. He fell onto the deck, unconscious. Pak Dul signaled to lower the anchor. But the anchor wouldn't drop. The chain was held as if something was gripping it from beneath the sea. Even the sails flapped without wind, as if another force was at play on the deck. Then a sound was heard. Not a human voice, but a sound like something from a nightmare. Hoarse. Deep. Prolonged. You have trespassed. That was all that was heard. Then, instantly, the blue firelight extinguished. The fog thickened. The old ship slowly vanished as if swallowed by the water. No ripples. No sound of explosions or waves. Only silence returned. Some crew members screamed hysterically. Some prostrated themselves. Some cried in silence. Jamal got up, helping the still unconscious Yamin, while staring at the empty stern. No one could explain what they had seen, but all agreed it was not a human ship. Not from this world. And its presence was not without a message. That night became the quietest night of their 3-month journey. No one dared to sleep. No one spoke. They just sat, huddled together, hoping for the night to turn into day. However, the next dawn did not come as usual. The fog did not lift. The sky remained grey. And from the distance, the faint clang of that ship's bell could still be heard. That night, the wind shifted. The sky, once clear, turned black again, and the rumble of thunder began to growl in the distance. Dark clouds swirled above the sea, like a giant vortex awakening from a long slumber. From the south, a reddish light swept across the horizon. It wasn't an ordinary light. Its glow was like burning embers, moving slowly but steadily closer to their ship. The faces of all the crew members paled. Pak Anwar, who was on watch on the upper deck, suddenly screamed, his eyes wide in disbelief. In the distance, high waves like giant walls reflected the reddish glow from the turbulent sky. This red storm wasn't just a natural disaster. It carried something invisible, yet it pierced them to the bone. Joni and Darman in the wheelhouse immediately turned on all emergency lights. Radio communication was disrupted again. Strange voices could be faintly heard on the frequency, like overlapping whispers echoing from the seabed. Andre tried to fix the signal by adjusting the antenna above, but each time he touched the ship's metal, a subtle electric current stung his body.